We're back.
We are back.
No technical difficulties this time.
The internet is in full effect at Alex's house.
Yeah, we went through a lot last week. Had to buy a new modem. Comcast upgraded the lines. We had a lot. It was a tech-heavy week, I would say.
Yes. Did it continue to cause you problems after that day, or did you figure it out on
No,
Thursday?
we stabilized. We got to where we needed
You
to be.
righted the ship?
Well, actually, no. It did cause some problems. We bought a modem, and the modem we got it from a local store, and
Sure.
it had 4 ports, as modems tend to have multiple ports. 3 of the 4 ports didn't work,
Great.
so we could only plug one cable into that modem. So we ultimately had to return that one. Got a new one, but now we're smooth sailing at this point. Everything functions. So.
I remembered after talking to you about it a little bit that when I got fiber internet, they had they didn't have the modem that I was like allotted, and they were like, oh yeah, we're out of stock. It was like the newer model, and they just they were like, well, we're gonna give you the old one, and then you call us and we'll give you the new one eventually when we get it back in stock. And I think they fully rely on me I've never called. I just have that old shitty modem that they gave me at that time.
You know what people want to do with their internet at home? Absolutely nothing. The
I know.
ideal scenario is that you just walk in the house and it works all the time and you don't
Yeah.
ever have to think about it. So on the rare occasion when you have to think about it, it's all bad. It's like umpires in baseball. It's like,
Yeah,
if you
umpires
notice
and offensive linemen.
Yeah, if you notice it's there, huge problem.
Yeah.
So, and I will say, I mean, it's like it's been 2 to 3 years without any interruptions, so I guess things have been going okay. It's like the one time there's a plane crash and the millions of safe landings. It's like that's all you're going to hear about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, the fact is that you crashed in this one, so
I did. Well, yes, it was a group effort, a full group project here from the fine folks at Xfinity
sure.
to myself. Just everybody was on the same page with this one.
I wasn't saying that you were the pilot in this. I wasn't giving you blame. What I was saying is that the reason this one feels so severe is it because it affects you. A whole plane full of people crashes, I don't care. But if I'm in the plane, I'm very upset.
That's a much darker analogy. Yes.
Isn't that you literally made that analogy? You're the one that made the analogy.
I just meant it was like, how on the news you only hear about planes crashing. You never hear
absolutely.
Them landing safely. And then you took it to a place where the next time I'm on a plane and it starts to rumble a little bit, I'm going to think about
You're
how
going to blame Xfinity. I get it. Yeah.
Think about this moment and be like, that motherfucker will probably still do the podcast without me next week.
Oh, absolutely. And still in memoriam, I must share to your Twitter account.
I'm gonna tell you what right now. If I had to handpick eulogies, I don't know if you'd be on the list, man. I don't know if you'd be.
Damn, you've seen me do a wedding, and you.
That's true. Actually, I have seen you do a pretty good wedding. Actually, you know what? I'm the type of person that when I die, I want as many eulogies as I can get from anybody and everybody. I don't care, even if it's like because there's those people on social media. We all know who they are, and everybody has these people in their life. Anyone can die. Anyone, and they have the ability to make it about themselves. They're like, once upon a time, I sat behind this person at a restaurant and it was the greatest day of my life. They were so nice to everybody. It's like you didn't even really interact with them. Like you just want this moment to be about you and not about them passing. It's like we all do that to some degree. Anyway, I'm giving everybody free reign right now. When I die, go ahead. You can say that you met me once or whatever.
Well, see, this isn't special now, though. You basically what you did is you took away the part where I can be like, oh, it's really special that Alex lets me eulogize him. And you're like, actually, you can, and so can 15,000 other people that follow me on Twitter.
It's like free software on the internet. When people just release something for free, I want to do that, but with my own personal existence.
Okay, well let's Mike Hansen says, are we going to talk sports or just bitch at each other? I do have a sports adjacent topic to start us with, which is, have you heard this? Kelly Stafford, Matt Stafford's wife, did an interview on a podcast, and I want to play the audio from it because I just want to. There's a couple things about this that I want to address, and I might fall on a side of this. Actually, it might be a side that you expect, but maybe a side that other folks don't expect.
I haven't heard about any of this, so this is all new.
This is exciting. This will be exciting stuff. Hold on, let's get old Kelly Stafford fired up here. Tell me if you can hear this, by the way.
Wait, so was he trying to casually date and you were all in?
Oh, yeah, girl.
Okay, so she's on this podcast. I believe it's called the Off the Vine podcast, based on the TikTok handle here. I don't know the podcast well. I'm not a loyal listener to the Off the Vine podcast. I'm sorry to report. This is not what I wanted. What am I doing here? I was zoomed in for the earlier, and that's what I want. I want to be. Well, let's see the. Oh, motherfucker.
You're good. You're good right here. Just leave it.
All right,
here.
fine, Alex, fine. Anyways, so they were talking about dating Matt Stafford in college, and people are making a big deal out of this. I'm going to continue playing the rest of it.
Anyways, long story short, it wasn't that cute of a relationship at first. I hated him. I loved him. I dated the backup to piss him off, which worked.
Yes.
He was like,
that'll do it.
He was the bad boy too. Like Matthew's so sweet and Southern gentleman and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And the backup was the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Ooh, and it upset him. So they lived in the same dorm because athletes lived in the same dorm, and he would see my car there. And so at one point he like waited and followed me out and got in my car and wouldn't get out.
Stop.
And he was
You're
like,
this is so hot.
I was like, this is amazing. It's working.
Yeah.
I was get out of my car, and he was like, he's not right for you. And I was like, what? You can't tell me that.
Okay, so first off, there's a lot of stuff about this.
This is where you wanted to start today.
That's where I wanted to start because it was fresh in my mind. I had seen the video recently, and so right. I know that you and I both have wives. That's one thing I know about us. You have a wife so my wife has never attempted to be like a public figure of any kind. I don't think that your wife like officially was trying to be a public figure, but she certainly was like commenting on Seattle sports in a way that was like participating in the discourse on Twitter. My wife's like never done any of that stuff. No like attempt to gain a following of any kind or to make public comments or jokes or whatever about, which is not a value judgment. But what I'm saying is the reason I'm on Kelly Stafford's side of this, by the way. People are going like, this lady said she fucked the backup quarterback at Georgia. She never said she fucked him. I'll say that. And these are Southern people with blonde hair. These might be save yourself for virginity people. I don't know. Probably not, realistically. One thing it did make me do is go check the 2006 to 2008 Georgia depth chart to see who this person was. And if it's who Antonio Brown thinks he was, I did not recognize the person right off rip.
He was a nobody. He was just some guy.
Sure. Bad boy, apparently. Another part of this that I think is like maybe... So people are making fun of Matt Stafford as though he got cuckolded because his girlfriend dated someone else or his wife dated someone else some point from 2006 to 2008. And then they have like 4 children together now. It's over. Like he won whatever war this is or whatever tired analogy you want to put on this. But also... it's very obvious to me that Matt Stafford's wife, Kelly Stafford, she's doing a bunch of podcast interviews. I actually was just like typed her in. She had a 6-episode stint of a very, I would call it like stilted podcast at some point in 2022, I think, on YouTube of her own. This woman is trying to be in the entertainment world. She lives in Los Angeles. That's the reality. Whether you like that or not, that is the case. And I'm going to tell you this. I tell stories about my wife on stage on occasion that were I not a comedian, they'd be very inappropriate to tell on stage. And I'm not talking about like graphic sexual stuff. I'm talking about just like
maybe you should expand there.
Yeah,
maybe.
I really
maybe
got
that's the future for you.
I got to step
I huffed
it up
and I puffed, and there was a lot of breathing heavy. And,
I huffed and
sweat.
I puffed, and actually that was about the end of it because I do not have the lung capacity that I used to, or stamina. Period. Anyways, so what I would say is I understand people want to have this like. I actually don't even think this is like that much of a scandal as far as like what actually happened. Doesn't seem like it's that obviously. One part that's getting underappreciated is Matt Stafford just like camping out in this woman's car as a college student. That's a very 2006 to 2008 thing. That man would be arrested in 2024 if he did that.
Yeah, it's a little something, I'll say.
What is the something?
I'm not gonna say the word.
I think you should say it. It's creepy, or is it?
Yeah.
Does it share a? Is it the same
creepy.
amount of syllables as
a little bit? But you know what? Clearly, that sort of thing appealed to her.
Sure.
Based on everything she said there. Yeah.
No, this type of relationship's fine for you. If Harrison Butker's wife wants to stay at home, you won't stand for that. She must work. Put her in the goddamn coal mines. But
a week ago, he let her out. He let her out of the kitchen. Harrison Butker took his wife out on the town, and they posed for some pictures. And I was like,
yeah. Not only that, she went on a podcast also, by the way, and said, "This is what I want," and everyone's like, "Fuck you, you suck. We hate that about you. We don't like that." And then Harrison Butker saves a person's life, and they're like, "Well, there's no winning anymore. Harrison Butker has unlocked. Half the country is going to hate him no matter what he does." So
yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing about Kelly Stafford. I mean, first of all, people need hobbies. She's a woman in her mid-30s who's raised 4 kids and been married her whole life, and spent a lot of time in Detroit, which had to be rough.
Yeah.
So I would imagine getting to LA is a nice change from where they were previously. And I think I've seen this with a lot of people. You've probably seen this with people your age too. But we all have friends that got married really young, or like they're married to their high school or college sweethearts. And regardless of who the partner is in that marriage or that relationship, you see a lot of these people get to their mid-30s and they're like, I just watched for the last 10 to 15 years, all of my friends, all the people I know have a great time being single, going out, posting everything they've done on social media. And all I've been doing is sitting at home raising these kids. And now I need something to occupy my time that's not parenting. And I'm sure in their case, in the Stafford's case, they have somebody to take care of these kids that is not Kelly Stafford, right? Sure. So she's probably just looking for something to do. And this is, she's got enough public notoriety to go, have her own pot. For us, it's like, we can't really throw stones. We're doing this for nobody besides ourselves. Really.
That's right. There's supposedly 101 listeners between all platforms right now. Is what. See,
that's says. That's if that filled a room, I'd be like, well, I don't know. Should I order a couple pizzas? Like we can it's like a neighborhood watch meeting.
That is true. We could actually afford to pay or to feed all those people, not to pay.
I don't want to do that.
To feed them all.
Fuck them. They can feed themselves.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, to me, this is a matter of like your own taste in a relationship, and it's like not a scandal. They want to make it a scandal because I feel like quarterbacks are all like the governor of their team. They all have to be, or the president. They're the CEO of their team. Do you ever like? I mean, I'm pretty lucky. One, my wife is like has been a mature adult the whole time I've known her, to a degree anyway. And the ways that she was immature were like financial, not like she would get too drunk and like fuck another dude or something like that. You know what I mean?
We've all been there. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm not like ever worried my wife is gonna like embarrass me in any way. One of the reasons is like I have a pretty high tolerance for embarrassment. I'm a comic, right? Like I have very thick skin.
I don't know if anyone. Yeah, I'm not sure anyone could embarrass you more than you could embarrass you.
Absolutely. Well, I've probably said worse about me than someone can say about me.
Comedian's code. If you beat everyone else to the joke, then it takes away their power, and that's the key.
That's right. But also like I've had like where my wife and I were at a place like a brewery, and she's like mad about service, like that bad service, and I'm like, okay, just relax, because I might have to do a comedy show in this place pretty soon. So like, let's not make a big deal out of this. Like, pay the extra $1 tip to not have them remember that we even exist. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Other than that, like, there's absolutely nothing. And I guess like I don't know what I would want if my wife started to like. She's like, I want to do a podcast on my own. I don't know what I would do.
I think you two should do a podcast. You've had
if you think this hasn't been brought up,
you've had all these podcasts with other people.
Sure.
It's now you have to do. I don't even know what
you think. You're the first person to come up with this idea, Alex. You think I'm
have you ever listened to a married couples podcast? It's always weird, man.
No, I never have.
I've listened to a couple. It's very strange.
Well, it also seems like to me a very common occurrence in those podcasts is eventually they get divorced because a variety of things. One, like I even think having your relationship too much on the internet for me is like. Would be too stressful. Like my wife and I are both like reasonably private people, despite the fact that I'm like actively seeking out an audience. Like I'm not posting pictures of my house all the time or my kids or my wife. That's like very calculated. That's on purpose. That's the relationship we have. But Kelly Stafford is becoming a public figure. That's what's happening. And if that's the case, she's going to tell embarrassing stories about her husband. Her husband just happens to be the starting quarterback of the team in Los Angeles. He won't be that for that much longer. And we won't give a shit about those stories anymore. But it's like this lady has to act like she's the first lady because her husband is the starting quarterback of like the 5th most beloved franchise in Los Angeles.
Do you remember like 20 years ago, Chris Benson, the major league pitcher, and his wife,
Dude,
Anna
yes.
Benson? That was like a whole saga. Remember that? That was
Yes.
She like posed for Playboy or something. She was like, when they got together, everybody was like, "Wow, what a smoke show!" And then as time went on, they're like, this relationship might be on shaky ground." And I think they ultimately got divorced, if I remember correctly. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they're still together. I don't know. But that was the first time you really started hearing about players and their wives. Now it's like a whole thing, like the wives and girlfriends movement of athletes. But Anna Benson was like the pioneer that started that whole thing.
I have a brief update on Anna Benson. You are correct. They Anna Benson and Chris Benson got divorced in 2012, and then I'm going to read this directly from Wikipedia so as to not get the details wrong. She pleaded and pled always. That's a bad start to the sentence, by the way. But I think I'm going to say pled, even though it says pleaded. She pled guilty to aggravated assault and weapons charges on November 5th, 2013 in Marietta, Georgia, and was sentenced to 15 years probation. Oh, you think that's the end, Alex? It's not the end. In August 2016, Benson was arrested again after she allegedly trespassed in the home at a home in Mableton and stole mail in April of that year. While in jail, she was scheduled to appear at a probation revocation hearing in Cobb County Superior Court in Marietta, but did not show up. A representative for the district attorney, blah, 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 blah. She's whatever. She's she applied for mental health court, probably needed it, probably legit. Not going great for Anna Benson post Chris Benson is what I would say.
It seems like they have some troubles. Yeah.
Did Chris Benson ever pitch for the Mariners?
No, he did not. He
feels like a guy who would have.
Chris Benson was, I remember when he first came up with the Pirates, he was a super prospect. That guy was like, everybody thought he was going to be the next big ace. And he was a good pitcher for a long time. He just never really materialized the way everyone, I think, thought he would. So
yeah, everything they thought Strasburg was going to be, they kind of felt the same thing about Chris Benson at a point. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about the Mariners. So the Mariners lost today. They're basically like, I think the rest of the season is going to be kind of in this like boring. They're probably going to lead the division. I think the highest probability or the plurality outcome is that they lead the division the rest of the year and take first in the AL West. And that's that. They're probably not going to get the bye. They're probably not going to, probably not going to lose the division to anyone else that's in the division.
Yeah. They hurt themselves. They hurt themselves with a chance at the bye with this series to Cleveland. It's interesting. It feels like something so pivotal shouldn't be happening right now, but the reality is this is the last chance they had to get some games on Cleveland. Now, if there is a head-to-head tiebreaker, Cleveland has that tiebreaker over the Mariners with a better head-to-head record. So, I mean, they could still find a way to ultimately play better than Cleveland down the stretch and have a better record than them and find their way into one of the top two positions to get that first round bye. But yeah, I mean, right now it seems like the Yankees, Cleveland, they kind of have the inside track to those two spots, and the Mariners will have to pick it up a little bit to get there.
Yeah. So the rest of this, until the trade deadline, we get to think about like shaping this team for the playoffs, heading into September, shaping them for that. And also, I think you start to talk about load management, and Brian Wu has become like kind of a lightning rod. I would say for the Mariners, he's like the face of load management for pitchers, for having a pitch count and sticking to that pitch count. A couple weeks ago, he threw a game where I think he had given up 0 runs and got pulled after like 66 pitches. The next start that he makes, was supposed to make, he gets scratched from, I believe, and then he got beat up a little bit yesterday. And a couple things about Brian Wu. One, people are talking about him going to the bullpen. He throws hard. He does not miss bats. Like, this dude is not a bullpen. He is not, like, to me, an immediate bullpen candidate. A guy whose stuff doesn't really miss bats as a starter is probably not going to play up enough to justify a spot in the bullpen. Sure, that might, like, reduce his day-to-day. I guess the other part of it is, might reduce his day-to-day. He's not going to throw 90 pitches in a day, but he might throw 30 pitches twice a week, 3 times a week, and that's potentially a problem. What I would say is, what I think it really points out is the Mariners still need depth in the rotation. And
yeah,
they have, like, and also, God, why can't I think of it? Emerson Hancock, left injured yesterday too.
Yeah.
They have 5 guys. They have 4 guys now, basically, that they can rely on, and they're one injury away from it being less than that.
I think there's like this assumption that if the Mariners make a trade to augment their major league roster, that like Emerson Hancock has to be included in that trade. But I don't think they are going to trade him. I don't know. There's something about Hancock that makes me think, A, they feel like they might need him on this roster down the stretch. B, I don't think his return is super high. Like he came up for a spot start against I believe it was Kansas City a week ago. Pitched a really great game, threw 7 innings. He only struck out 1 batter.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not like, I know when the Mariners drafted Emerson Hancock, people thought he was like a top of the rotation type of guy. He's kind of settling into more of like a back at the rotation kind of guy, and he's not really like a high strikeout dude. So I think he'll be there, assuming he's healthy. I think he's a guy that they might be able to retain and avoid having to deal. I would just say, to comment on the depth, they also brought up Jonathan Diaz for a spot start. He's really dominated down at AAA. He's kind of an older guy, but he's pitched really well, so they feel confident there. And then people forget that they have Dallas Keuchel in AAA pitching for the Rainiers right now. So I mean, if you could do a lot worse than a guy like that as a potential reserve. I mean, a guy who's got extensive big league experience and at one time was one of the best pitchers in the game. So they have some options if they fall victim to some of these injuries. Brian Woo's is interesting because it almost feels like people want him to either definitely be injured or definitely be healthy. And the concept of like, right? Doesn't it feel like that?
Yes, yeah,
like,
absolutely.
It's like the people who are upset that he's getting pulled at 80 pitches are like, they just want his arm to fall off and have it be decided, right? Like they want him to have to go under the knife so we don't have to keep talking about all of this stuff. And it's like, the reality of being a pitcher or a baseball player in general is you go through these periods sometimes where you just have arm fatigue, where you have dead arm. And that's
sure.
That no one's used that term with Brian Wu specifically, but the way that he describes kind of this, this inability to recover from pitching. And it's not even just the inability to recover the next day. It's like inability to recover between innings has been kind of the key problem. He'll go out there, he'll look great, for an entire inning or two. He'll come back if he has a long rest in between. He comes back out and things maybe are a little shaky. And so it's almost like, because it's a little less predictable than maybe your more common arm fatigue there, where you see guys who don't recover a day or two later, people are like upset by this. And it's like, the Mariners are doing exactly what they have to do with Brian Wu to make sure that he's okay. No one knows his arm better than he does. And the people who probably know it next best are on that training staff, right?
Sure.
There's been so many injuries to pitchers in the recent past with the Mariners that people have you always see people complain about the training staff of the Mariners. Like there's something wrong with the Mariners trainers. It's like, they're just doing what every other team does. There's injuries all across baseball, and the Mariners have actually gotten pretty lucky the last few years. They haven't had like real significant injuries minus like Robbie Ray a year ago. So they've been doing pretty well in that regard. But with Brian Wu, it's like, you just have to hope that you can keep managing this. And even if you're only getting 80 pitches out of him every start, that's still better than 0 pitches out of him for the rest of the year. The bullpen thing, I think, I mean, I get why people would want to put him in the bullpen. He's got 2 really good pitches. He throws really hard. And you think, oh, well, if he's going max effort for an inning or 2, then those velocity numbers are going to tick up a little bit. But the thing about being in the bullpen is you have to be available multiple days a week. And for a guy who's had trouble recovering between innings and after starts, it's like, how's he supposed to be available 3 or 4 times in a week? That's just, it doesn't seem like it would be feasible. So why would you want to go and disrupt disrupt that rhythm he has. It seems like right now he's able to kind of respond to starting a little bit. You know, if he has to miss a start here or there, fine. I mean, you have the nice thing is the rest of that Mariners rotation, 3 of the 5 are major league vets at this point. Bryce Miller's younger, but he hasn't shown any signs of trouble. So, you know, you have the ability to bring up a guy for a spot start here and there, or, you know, rely on somebody else, or just even realign if you have an off day or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of view the way the staff is set up as a little bit advantageous in a way, because it's not like they have a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 quality starter. It's like I would say like they maybe don't have like a true number one shutdown ace on that staff necessarily, but they have like 3 number 2s and a number 3, and then Woo is probably like a 3.5 or something like that. Like, these are quality. They have a lot of quality, a lot of depth. But if you're worried about Bryan Woo at all, which I'm sure the Mariners are, by the way, it's not like the fan base gets to decide if they're worried. I'm sure the Mariners are worried about him. Go get a starter. It's not a question. It's not like, well, if he's fine.
I don't think they need a starter, and I'll tell you why. I mean, I think you're going to be able to get through the rest of the regular season without any issue, because even if Bryan Woo goes down and spends some time on the IL or whatever, that's where you have Hancock or Diaz or even Keuchel if you got to that point. I mean,
sure.
You're talking Keuchel at this point is like your 4th string quarterback, right?
Sure.
Like, if we get to him, that's like we're breaking the glass in case of emergency. But the reason why you don't need another starter is because by the time you get to the playoffs, by the time you get to the postseason, you're only starting 3 guys anyway. And the other 2 shift to the bullpen. But they shift to the bullpen in such a way that you're able to kind of like control when they pitch, right? Because in the playoffs, you have these breaks between games. You're not going every single day. And you see in the playoffs, every pitcher has a short leash. You know, you rarely see a guy go 6 or 7 innings in the postseason anymore. So you're expecting, you know, let's say you get 5 out of Castillo, Kirby, and Gilbert. You know, you have a guy that you can bring in for the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. You develop a plan for those 4 innings where, you know, if there's like a guy like Woo gets shifted to the bullpen, let's say Woo and Miller both get shifted to the bullpen in the playoffs if they get there. You know, you could find a way to maximize them so that they're not pitching on short rest, that they're staying in rhythm and still contributing in those innings to be able to cover some depth for the rest of your bullpen. Yeah. So adding another starter in that instance, you know, I guess.
But that's in the instance, of course, where Woo is healthy, where the other 4 pitchers stay healthy, and that's probably not going to be the case. If we're just going down like even if it's not, like what starter are you going to be able to go get that you feel more confident about than Emerson Hancock or even Diaz? Well, we don't know. I mean, again, Emerson Hancock went down left the game with an injury yesterday. The pitchers get injured. They're volatile players on your team. They have a very good pitching staff. And I actually think, by the way, like, one thing I will say, while I do think the Jerry Dipoto era has run its course, I do think the Mariners have, to a degree, zigged when the league zagged, focused on pitching when everybody's focused on signing 12-year deals with these very good hitters, by the way. But like in a way, the Mariners have kind of like found an undervalued asset, which is starting pitching in a league that wants to shorten starter outings, that's like inching towards a 6-man rotation, that's inching towards 4-inning starter outings. Like the Mariners have invested reasonably in that spot and have been very successful doing that. But I think like you just can't have too much of that. And that guy can, if let's say you go get a guy, that guy can become part of your bullpen also. The rosters don't shrink, they just get reallocated. And I just think having redundancies as a team that's planning on going to the. By the way, I'm not saying they go out and trade all these prospects. I'm saying find a guy, and it could be a guy who's like the 3rd or 4th starter on a team that you're making another trade with. Like, we've talked a lot about the Diamondbacks. By the way, the Diamondbacks looking pretty good. Like, they're not looking like playoff favorites, but I don't think they're going to be selling very soon. But like a lot of teams have number 3 starter on their roster that maybe is at a lot. There's going to be a guy out there, and when a trade like that happens, the fan base is going to freak out because they're going to say the Mariners don't need. It's the same way when they draft a shortstop. They're like, well, they don't need a shortstop. J.P. Crawford's their shortstop, but it's these guys. You never know when or how you will need these guys. And my point is pitching depth. Bring in pitching depth.
I'll agree with you on one thing. The Mariners have a way of infuriating you with their trades, right? Like it's kind of like how the Seahawks drafted for a number of years, where you're like, you didn't need to go get whatever the hell you just got, Like
Yeah.
there's, like, why did you do that? You didn't need that. Um, I don't think that they would go get a starter for a few reasons. The ones I already listed, but also like they only have a certain number of assets they can deal.
Sure.
And starting pitching is always a premium at the trading deadline. So the teams that are real desperate for starters are probably going to be willing to outbid them or outbid anybody to go get a starting pitcher. And why would the Mariners want to get in a bidding war over a starting pitcher? It's not something that they really need at this point in time.
Well, you know me, I want the Mariners to go add a bunch of complimentary pieces, not make a bunch of big moves. And so to me, it's like it's somewhat irrelevant. Like if it's a number one starter, I don't think it's going to be a number one starter. I'm saying like a back of the rotation guy, somebody who's depth, somebody who could maybe profile as a bullpen arm that plays up in short outings.
Yeah, I would say for as infuriating as the Mariners trading ways can be, 2 years ago, I would even say going back 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when they were trying to make the playoffs and ultimately fell short on the last day of the season, they went out and they acquired Tyler Anderson because they needed a pitcher. They acquired pieces that they actually needed. 2 years ago, same thing. When they went to the playoffs, they needed a backup catcher. They needed, another arm. They went out and got pieces that they needed. So they kind of followed the script. Again, they weren't like big pieces, but they did enough to help the team get to where they wanted to be. It'll be really interesting this year because if the Mariners keep up what they're doing right now, they just got done with this big series against Texas. They sweep Texas. They put all this space between themselves and the Astros and Rangers, who are really their only competition for the division at this point. And if they can continue to run away with this division, then they really have an opportunity that they've never, ever had before in the Dipoto era. They just, like, even the year that they made the playoffs, it's not like it was any guarantee they were going to make the playoffs. So if they can put this thing away by around the trade deadline, then that really changes how you approach the rest of the season. It changes how you play the games in August and September. It changes how you rest guys, and it changes who you acquire and add to this team. So this is all new. This is going to be very new to them, and anything can happen. We're still so far out. I mean, the Astros or the Rangers could make up this deficit of 9 or 10 games that they're facing right now and make things interesting for sure. But the nice thing about the last couple of weeks for the Mariners is that they've gone a long way in kind of securing their ability to drop a few games or a few series here and not have to worry about someone being right on their tail. And that gives them a little bit more freedom to make some of these moves that could be coming down the line. So, it's interesting because it allows them to control their own destiny more. A minute ago, you mentioned the Diamondbacks and kind of where they were at. For all the Mariners have done to potentially create sellers out of the rest of the AL West teams, seemingly every other team in baseball that was on the cusp of being, deciding whether they were a buyer or seller has kind of found themselves muddled in the middle and now seems to be, kind of trending more towards the buyer side, which is going to make things tough for the Mariners. I mean, right now, the only teams that are truly selling are the Marlins and the White Sox. Mariner fans know all about the White Sox and Luis Robert and what they could potentially do there. But, when you only have two sellers on the market, one of whom has already sold their big piece in Luis Arraez in Florida or Miami, it's like there's just not a lot of options out there. The White Sox right now can demand the world for Luis Robert, and somebody's going to have to pay it if they want to pry that guy away. So it's a tough place to be because so many teams are playing like mediocre baseball and finding themselves in the middle of a playoff hunt that has just been completely undecided up to this point.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to talk a little bit. I saw an interview with John Smoltz talking about the cause of pitcher injuries. Why are pitchers getting injured? Why can't pitchers go deep into games? And I think it's like it echoed pretty obviously a lot of the stuff that you and I have talked about. I talked about David Ardsma, and we've heard a lot of people talk about, which is like the max effort. And so we talked about it a little bit last week. You were talking about there's going to be some miracle advancement in science that we don't know about at this point. When I was listening to Smoltz talk about it, he brought up an idea that I think is like interesting to think about, and we can debate its efficacy, but he basically said that he thinks that like increasing roster size and allowing teams to carry more pitchers is causing these teams to, and obviously players are getting paid for they don't get paid for innings anymore. They get paid for strikeouts, pretty much. Like, that's the reality. And they don't get paid for ground balls anymore. They get paid for strikeouts. Strikeouts are what fuel sabermetric, like darlings. It's these guys get paid for strikeouts. They throw full effort every pitch. This is the cause. Pitchers are not getting long-term contracts like hitters are, but they are still like getting paid a lot of money, and that's what gets them paid. So that's what they're going to do. The incentives for pitchers are pretty obvious. Strike a shitload of batters out. Don't walk very many batters, and teams will pay you. For teams, it's a little bit different because they have to worry about the health of that guy, and so they build this into shorter term contracts. I think what he's saying kind of goes along with the idea. Have you ever heard this idea that if you took helmets out of football, you would reduce concussions because nobody would make these big dangerous hits?
Yeah, it's like the rugby theory, basically.
Sure. And I do think there's validity to that. But what I think is challenging about where baseball is at right now and the situation with baseball, period, is that you have to deal with the situation that exists right now, and there's 13-year contracts literally on the books right now. There are 13-year contracts with hitters, not pitchers, but like, yeah, you could say like if we reduce the rosters to 20 back to 25 man or reduce them even further, or legislate something into the game, that'll change. Just like market factors will change. Pitchers will start throwing at 90% effort instead of 100% effort. They'll be trying to throw 115 pitches instead of 75 great pitches. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we're like, how many iterations, how many GMs do we have to churn through? How many pitching coaches, how many sabermetricians and kinesiologists do we have to go through before that gets there? And that feels to me like if you make that change now, we might be 30 years away from seeing that actually get guys back to throwing 250 innings in a year. And it just seems like it's kind of like that whole thing, the 90% thing used to be like almost an honor thing where it was like guys threw, it was like considered like dishonorable to throw off-speed pitches. It was like trickery instead of raw power. There were these unwritten rules that kind of held baseball in check, and we're kind of seeing it's ripping at the seams to a degree. Like the framework, what we knew baseball to be, is ripping at the seams in a way that's like almost becoming harder to watch.
Yeah, pitching has really I feel like it is the most divisive subject in baseball right now, where it divides like the old school purists from the new school data driven analysts, right? Like nothing else divides these people more than pitching. You know, anytime you hear an old ex-major leaguer talk about pitching, their solution is always just to let these guys go back to throwing more, because in their day, when they threw more, that was better, right? Throwing more was always the solution. If you just went out and threw long toss every day, then your arm would get stronger and stronger, and you would be able to throw forever like Nolan Ryan. And I think that's probably wrong. But there's elements of it that are correct, for sure.
Yeah.
You have to build. You can't just go out there having not thrown in a year and try to throw your very hardest and expect it to go well, right? So there is some elements of that. Otherwise, we wouldn't warm up in anything that we do, whether it's throwing a baseball or just going to a gym class, right? So there is some elements of that are correct. But at the same time, there are elements of kind of the data-driven model that are wrong as well. I mean, one recent example is Lance McCullers Jr. Lance McCullers Jr. for years was like this stat darling. He was like every year Fangraphs was like, this guy's going to win the Cy Young. He's going to win the Cy Young. And every year what happened? He got injured. Every year he got injured. But the reason they loved him so much is because his quantifiable metrics were off the charts. His spin rate, off the charts. His curveball, off the charts. He threw hard enough to get his fastball by you. Everything he did was what you would want in a prototypical pitcher. The problem is all of that stuff that he did great is eventually what wore him down and continues to wear him down. So even as he's still an active major leaguer, but man, no one's seen this guy pitch in forever because he's always hurt. That guy spends more time on the IL than he does in uniform. And so, you know, the point is like, even the metrics don't necessarily, you know, end up lending to the right solution. Neither solution is correct. There has to be some sort of model here that brings these together that makes it all work. I mean, the solution for a lot of organizations, it's always felt like when it comes to protecting your investment, is to put guys in bubble wrap. And I don't think that necessarily works either. It's like if you're a parent and the way that you protect your child is to keep them locked in their room all the time, that's going to be very bad in the long run, right? Like, we know that's not going to work out well. So why do professional sports organizations effectively do that with their players? At the same time, you don't want them going out and having free reign to do whatever they want, because then they end up like Malik McDowell and drive an ATV into the ground, you know? Like, so there's a lot. There's a lot you have to consider.
Talk about me in a dark example. Oh, didn't he also, by the way, didn't he beat up like a dude? And that's the same.
Many years later when he was with the Browns. Yeah, but the reality is, I mean, like, everybody's, because of how we handle discourse now and the way that we talk about any subject that's divisive, there is no nuance or gray area. Everybody has to be firmly in one camp or the other. So it's like, you're either the old man yelling at the cloud, telling guys that the solution is to throw more and do more than what you think you can do, or you're the new school guy that's like, no, you want to do less, but do it with more effort and do it with more efficiency. Everybody's wrong. The only conclusion we can come to is that everybody is wrong, because guys are still getting injured. And not only are they still getting injured, but they're getting injured more than they ever were before. So this solution, whatever it is, it's not working.
One thing that I'll say is, I've been into sabermetrics long enough to see sabermetrics completely refute conventional wisdom, and then a couple years later come back around and actually reaffirm the old conventional wisdom. So that is actually one of, to me, the beautiful things about sabermetrics, is that it's constantly re-examining itself, right? Like, it's constantly trying to find the solution agnostic of what the hypothesis was. That's a good thing. I think a bad thing is it gives these players sometimes data that incentivizes them to make their best financial decision, which is, by the way, like, in the short term, it's great for these guys. What did Lance McCullers making his? By the way, Lance McCullers hasn't pitched in Major League Baseball since 2022. Jesus. When he signed his 5-year, or at least when it went into effect, his 5-year, $85 million contract. It's given these guys
that 5-year, $85 million contract for a guy of Lance McCullers' caliber would be a bargain if he was staying healthy. That would be a bargain in today's game. But the fact that he's not just makes it dead weight.
Yeah. He threw 25 pitches on June 8th. So it's not, his time isn't dead. He's just been injured. And you're also right. Like, he's only even thrown 100 innings in 4 seasons. 3 of his 7 seasons, he's pitched like 81 or less innings, always with a high strikeout rate, always with relatively high velocity, but never able to put it together. I like Lance McCullers is a great example, because he's a guy, just incredible curveball, and they were like, okay, we'll throw the curveball 60% of the time or something. I'm going to try to get to his pitch data, but I bet it's like an insanely high rate that he threw his curveball at.
Yeah, his body just couldn't hold up to whatever he was. I mean, it's entirely possible it was the fastball that hurt him too. Who knows? But regardless, I mean, his body just couldn't hold up. The problem with just the data-driven approach to baseball for a lot of people that can be frustrating is, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. You only really notice it when it's a problem. You know, for Mariner fans especially, the data-driven process, the Mariners talk about it. Everybody knows the Mariners are very data-driven, as most teams are now. But the Mariners, you know, they talk about it so much that you can't help but know about it. And at the same time, they haven't had a ton of success. So when you marry those two things, of course, it's going to be frustrating to a lot of fans, right?
Sure.
And that could start to push people in the wrong direction of, well, then whatever they're doing must not be working. So the other way must be the way that you find the path to success. And it's like, well, if you go too hard in either direction, it's not going to work. The thing that's frustrating is, like, if you're a Mariner fan watching the game and, you know, they come up with this game plan hours before the game starts. So, you know, even when Scott Service goes to a pinch hitter on his bench, that's been predetermined, right? And when it's the 5th inning and they pinch hit, you know, a hitter nobody likes for a guy that they do like, that can be frustrating for people, but they're strictly playing the analytics. So I'm sympathetic to it as a card player, as somebody who likes to gamble and who plays very much by the book, because I understand that if I am going to win any money, it has to be by these rules, or else I'm hurting myself, right?
Yeah.
Like, just from a strictly mathematical perspective, I'm hurting myself. So I understand why they stick to that mathematics. The difference between card playing or gambling and baseball or any sport is that you're dealing with a human element in baseball and sports that you're not dealing with in these other games of whatever, games of stats or chance or whatever you want to call them, that rely on mathematics. You're not, whatever I do in a blackjack table, there's no human element involved.
Yeah.
But Mariners, it's like, hey, if you pinch hit for this guy and he's dealing with all sorts of shit off the field that you don't know about, that's going to be a problem, right? So it's like there's all these things. You can't just I think people get frustrated because players get it seems like they get jerked around a lot of times and maybe don't get a chance to develop a rhythm or things like that to be able to really establish themselves. And just the concept of riding the hot hand, for example, gets completely lost if you're fully data focused.
Sure. And I guess I would say to kind of put a bow on your analogy, I think that there's a difference between playing. It's like people want to play poker, or baseball's poker, not blackjack. Where in blackjack you can just basically do the math, and especially if you're counting cards, you can do the math and just go this is the decision I have to make. Poker, there certainly is an element of luck and chance. There's also, you're playing against 8 or 9 other people at a table, and so you have to know something about those people. You have to take in data from those people and use kind of squishy science, some kind of some less quantifiable things to make some judgments about that person. And then a lot of people think that when the Mariners are playing blackjack, they're actually playing slots and the odds are actually against them because they're doing this stupid thing. No, the Mariners want to make marginal gains. There's a very good book by a now maligned sports writer who I'm not gonna back what the sports writer did, but it's a very good book called The Extra 2%. It's about the Tampa Bay Rays. It's by Jonah Carey, who I believe is actually in prison for beating his wife, by the way, but that doesn't delegitimize what the Rays did, which was to always try to make these marginal improvements to their team. And I think I basically agree with you. The Mariners talk a good game. They don't do a great job of executing it. But the fact that they make it part of their marketing strategy makes it's really annoying because it just feels like they're trying to shut up the cynics about the team as opposed to actually make a meaningful change to their philosophy. And I understand how a Dave Cameron type, a Jeff Sullivan type could be very annoying I don't even know who the guys are now, who the top guys, annoying analytics guys would be to the Mariners right now. But it's satiating those guys while also keeping the game accessible to less data focused fans. But then the thing is that until this year, has never really lent itself to a very good product on the field. And even you could argue at points this year, there's been stretches, games lost, that could have been won were the team to have made a meaningful investment in the offseason.
It's really funny with the Mariners specifically that they profess about being this data-driven baseball machine. Basically, we're just baseball robots that are playing off the numbers. We don't care what anybody says. We're just going to go with the mathematics on this. Fine. That's fine if you want to do that. But their behavior says everything to the contrary.
Yeah.
Jerry Dipoto, it doesn't seem like there's any more sensitive of a general manager out there than Jerry Dipoto. The 54% thing was clearly I just want to shut up all the people who are, bashing what we do or what our process is. Here's our process and here's why you're dumb for trying to go against it. And, just the way that this guy always wants to talk and say things to the media about their process and really, like you said, try to, I guess, prove the haters wrong in a way. It's how can you guys be these, just based on the emotion that you're showing to us when it comes to this process, how can anybody think that this process is just without emotion, right? How can we trust your process if everything you show us seems to say we're losing control, right? Because that guy doesn't seem like he's in control half the time when he speaks. It seems like he thinks he walks into the room thinking he's in control, and the second somebody asks him a tough question, things go haywire.
I want to address this. So JP Crawford got kicked out of the game yesterday on 2 consecutive high strikes calls. And I don't have a lot to say about the strike zone yesterday in particular. I do say I'm excited for the day when we can just stop talking about balls and strikes and just have an electronic strike zone that's established before the season. And I don't think we're that far away from it, by the way. And I've been called a lot of names over the course of the last decade for advocating for this on Twitter. and the day is finally coming. These chickens are coming home to roost. All the people who I think I started the hashtag robot umps, by the way. I'm not even kidding. And I'm like fully on board with. I've been posting pictures of the Base Wars umpire for like since 2013, probably on Twitter, because yeah, it's super annoying. It's super annoying that games get shifted by these like small increments, but iterated enough times it's fucking annoying. I'm so ready for robot umpires, and I don't want these guys to lose their jobs. Keep these guys, but they still got to call outs and stuff.
Why can't umpires be like
care.
the rest of us and become obsolete with
Lose their
technology?
jobs.
You know, like we all, anybody you talk to is like, my job could be replaced by AI anytime. It's like, well, you know what? Throw umpires in there too.
Not us though. Not this podcast.
when you see the automated balls and strikes at the minor league level and how quickly the ball and strike challenge calls happen, it's amazing. Like if you're sitting there drinking and socializing in the stands, you're not even going to notice there's a ball strike challenge. You will have no idea, because what happens is the pitch comes in, it gets called a ball or a strike. All the player has to do is just call the batter. It's like you don't have to signal to anybody else. It's just you just have to say, I want that looked at. And they immediately look at it. It just pops up on the screen. So it's not like they're putting the headphones on like they do with other challenges. It just pops up on the Jumbotron, whether it's a ball or a strike. They just show it on the little graphic, and that's it. It happens so fast. It's like, bring that to the, like, how have we not brought that to the major leagues yet?
Yeah.
It's been a couple years down at the minor league level. I'm sure it's a union thing where they're not going to let that in until the last possible second. But the reality is those home plate umpires still make all the calls. It's just in an instance where you need to make a challenge because a batter feels like that pitch was out of the zone, instead of having to turn around and cuss out an umpire, all he has to do is say, check that, check to make sure that's actually what you called.
So is the way that it's happening now not that each call is made, but that only when there's a challenge is there a replay?
Yeah, I mean, like it's just like what you see on the screen with your little tracer. It's like every ball, every pitch that's being thrown is being traced by a machine behind the scenes.
But it's only getting used in the instance of a challenge.
It's only getting used when the batter challenges it.
I hate that. Make it every pitch.
But here's the thing. I don't hate that at all, because when you see these guys like JP's situation, when you see them turn around and yell at the ump, they know. No,
it's certainly better than what we have. It's better than the system we have. But to me, it's like, let's just take all that out of it. It's essentially instantaneous, and the other thing about it is there are strikes in baseball that are not ever called strikes. Like the effective strike zone we've talked about is like a horizontal oval. Make the strike zone the strike zone. That's what pitchers are pitching to.
Well, here's the thing about the automated strike zone, though. The reason it works is because before the season starts, all these guys have to submit their heights, their sizes, so that they can make sure that they have an accurate strike zone portrayed for them, so that when the ump calls it, it's being called correctly.
Sure.
So the two things are at play. I mean, you've got like the biology of it all with all the information they're submitting, and then you're relying on these players to know the zone. I mean, the best hitters, you see it all the time. These guys know when it's like not a strike and they're getting called a strike.
Well, they know what hasn't been called a strike their entire lives. But that will be an adjustment.
I think the reason why it makes sense to have the player call it is because it still gives the umpire some benefit of the doubt. Because every now and then,
fuck him.
Every now and then you'll see a player bitch about a strike call when it's actually a strike, when it's actually in the zone. Now, if he were to go and challenge that in that moment, he would lose the challenge. And so then like it at least gives the umpire some security. And I'm not saying like we don't have
fuck him.
I don't like umpires.
Can the pitchers not challenge? Can the pitchers not challenge?
They can. I believe they can challenge too.
How many challenges do they get?
I don't remember the number.
Fuck them. Get rid of them.
I like the human element. You can't
more umps.
You can't just award people. No.
Let AI be the umpires.
There's gamesmanship.
It's bullshit.
If we go too far, we're just.
They do it in tennis. They do it in tennis. It's fine. No. Okay. Charles Barkley is going to retire after next season, is what he says. It's kind of weird timing because that's also the last season of Inside the NBA, having a contract with TNT, right? And so it's kind of in this, like, I would say convenient time for him to be leveraging a little bit of my number one question is, I haven't looked into this story at all. Do you think he's actually retiring? Or do you think this is him kind of saying, like, I could just fuck off and not do any of this?
Charles Barkley, for the entire time he's been in the public sphere, has done whatever the hell he wanted.
Yeah.
So no one knows what he's going to do. I mean, people seem to think he is really standing by this decision to retire from broadcasting, which if he is, great. I mean, he's
Sure.
done it. He's had a great career, and he deserves the right to go work on his golf swing, which we know always needs a lot of work. So.
Actually, saw it recently, and it was looking a lot better than it used to.
Not so bad. I remember watching. There was a show for many years with Hank Haney where he fixed celebrities' golf swings, and
Yeah.
each season, I remember the first season he did was Charles Barkley, and it was still bad by the end of it. So how good of a coach can Hank Haney really be? And then the next season it was like much more boring because it was Ray Romano. And I remember Ray Romano's goal was just to break 80. And it's like, well, shit, man, most of us don't break 80. So
Yeah.
who the hell are you?
Let's get someone. Let's get someone in here who sucks at golf.
It was a really good idea for a show, but it was kind of all over the place. But yeah, the interesting thing about Charles, man, like, I mean, we grew up in the era where Charles Barkley was like reviled. People didn't like Charles Barkley in the 90s.
Sure.
You know, he spoke his mind, and that was like, that wasn't cool to a lot of people. And, you know, I think he'd be fine in the social media era now, I feel like, because there'd be a lot more people on his side than there probably were back then. But back then, man, his whole thing about not being a role model, and it just took a lot for people to like Charles Barkley then, especially when he was living in the era of Michael Jordan. And if you really want to expand that, the era of Jordan and Magic and Larry Bird and all these guys that were like beloved superstars. And then there's Charles, who's not any of those things. A superstar for sure, but beloved, not at all. And it feels like his career took a turn when he was in the Space Jam movie. Like that was the first time that he like kind of really humanized himself to people, right?
Sure.
Like, people were like, okay, this guy's okay. Like he's doing this for the kids or whatever, and the paycheck, I'm sure. But he seemed to become a more like engaging human being at that point. And as his career kind of came to its end, I always found him to be funny. Like I never thought ill of Charles Barkley. And ultimately when he made that transition to broadcasting, I mean, it was like the best thing he ever did. There's an entire generation of people that don't even know the player, you know, they only know this guy who's on Inside the NBA.
I wonder if there were like curmudgeonly late 30s, early 40s guys when he played that identified with him as much as I do now, because yeah, I agree with you. Like he did exactly what he wanted to do, and it like the world came around to him. He didn't change. He never changed. He's exactly the guy he was 20 years ago, and it's awesome. He's like hilarious, and he's irreverent, and he makes a show that nobody else could make. Like he's got enough cachet, cultural cachet at this point, that you would have never expected him to have because of his kind of curmudgeonly attitude at the time that like is great. It's one of the best things around. It's going to be celebrated for decades after it's gone. But I guess, do you think you say like he can do whatever he wants? Give me. I'm asking for a probability. You think this is it for Sir Charles, or
yeah? I mean, unless one of these networks that is picking up the NBA broadcast decides to pick up the entire Inside the NBA team, which that would be tough because some of them, you know, they could be like Charles and say, I'm just going to retire. Or you're talking about contracts with TNT that they'd have to get out. I mean, there's a lot of things at stake here. But, you know, it feels like for as much as people want to hold on to Inside the NBA, it's one of those things that has probably run its course. It's like a really great sitcom in a way. It's come so far. And now the nice thing about it is if it does end, like people think it might, then you have this one last season coming up to really appreciate it and enjoy it.
Yeah, that's true.
Just like you would have with any sitcom. Typically, it's like all the big sitcoms over the years. When you know it's the final season, people tune into every episode, right? That's just something that happens, and it's kind of like what that is. I mean, even as they've tried over the years to replicate that studio show, I mean, that is like the premier studio show that has been replicated across all sorts of sports leagues and different sports as well. I mean, like they've tried to copy this in every sport, it seems like. And nobody does it as well as these guys. Even when they like try to, you know, CBS and TNT will do the Final Four shows where they incorporate some of these guys like Kenny and Charles into the broadcast, but they also just try to replicate that studio vibe with other people. It just doesn't work because those guys have such a long history together and such, you know, good camaraderie and just good rapport back and forth that you can't replicate it. Even if you were to replace one cog in that wheel, if you were to just pull one of those guys out and replace him with somebody else, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. It's not the same. It's like when Michael Scott left The Office and The Office died after his departure, basically. It's like we've kind of hit the end of the line with this thing, and that's okay. Things have to come to an end, and this one's had a really, really nice run. And if that's the case, then people can enjoy it for one more year and be on their way.
You'd like to see it extend into something, and I think like pretty obviously, not that they could do that show on their own, but the two stars of that show are Shaq and Charles Barkley.
You know what? I hear you, but I give a lot of credit to Kenny.
Kenny's good.
Kenny almost, like, I don't think he intentionally does this. I don't think Kenny intentionally plays a character, but he basically is a character that is like the guy that gets shit on all the time, right?
Sure.
Like because he's not like, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s and you watched these guys play basketball, Shaq, superstar, number one pick. I mean, everybody knew who Shaq was. Shaq was right there. If Michael Jordan was at the top of the mountain, Shaq was the guy right behind him. Everybody knew Shaq.
Sure.
A little farther down that list, you have Charles, but everybody knew Charles because Charles made himself known all the time, no matter what he was doing. Charles lived in no man's shadow, even though he wasn't the face of the NBA. He lived in no man's shadow.
He also cast a pretty big shadow at different points in his career.
Yes. But if you go back and look at like highlights of Charles, like, people always joked in the 90s that he was like overweight or fat. You go look at him playing for the Suns, playing for the Rockets. He wasn't overweight.
Well, he lost a shitload of weight coming out of Alabama, by the way. I've listened to a bunch of interviews with him recently. Out of Auburn.
Yeah, he was a little pudgy, but he was never like, you see guys who are big now and you're like, damn, like those, like he makes Zion, like Zion is big, right? Like Zion Williamson, you look at him, it's like he's got some muscle definition, but that's a big dude. Charles was never like that bad off. Plus, he was playing power forward at like 6'4", which is crazy. I know they listed him at like 6'8" or whatever. He was 6'4".
Yeah, no, he was 6'4". I'm with you.
Yeah. The point I was trying to make is that Kenny, in the NBA during that time was nobody. He was nobody. Like he was a good college player that basically, kind of filled a role in the NBA, and he's maintained that same role in a way on this show. And it's like to basically defer to both those guys and still make your presence known. It's almost like incredible acting. That's the way I look at it. Like Charles is just being himself, Shaq is being himself, and Kenny, he's probably just being himself. But it almost feels like he's this incredible method actor who's doing this amazing job of playing this character within this great TV show that we all watch.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think my point is that these guys are the stars. I'd love to see something but I think without Ernie Johnson, without Kenny, it's a little different.
Yeah.
And so it's always going to be compared, and it'll never be as good. But you'd hate to see this like dynamic completely go away. And we live in a time where it's easier than ever to have. I mean, Shaq has a podcast. It's never been easier to like kind of move on from. I mean, literally The Office that you're talking. Like, there's a podcast called like The Office Ladies that are just Angela and Pam from The Office. Jenna Fisher, and I can't remember Angela's name, but just have a podcast about The Office. Oh yeah, that's great.
Angela Kinsey, yeah.
Angela Kinsey. Even like the Always Sunny guys have it. Like you don't have it
now.
Yeah, you do. Well, one, there is the weird thing. The Curb Your Enthusiasm as a podcast. Like that is a thing, but also it's just never been easier to like keep some element of these things going. And I hope that no matter what happens, I hope that what I would say about Charles Barkley that I think maybe people who are taking it at face value and aren't considering the leverage he might have. He owns a production company that he's talked about. Like, I think he wants to own whatever he is on next. I don't think he wants to be a cast member. I think he wants to be a producer.
If they took their whole show and let's keep it at the most basic level. If they just turned it into a YouTube show,
sure,
that would appear, every night when games are on or whatever, or once a week or whatever it is, it would be like the most popular show on YouTube. So it's like, whatever they decide to do, is it going to work out for them? It doesn't matter. If they decide to walk away, fine. They've created this amazing legacy.
So after 2025, though, you don't think Charles Barkley is done broadcasting about basketball? Can we agree on that? I don't think.
No, I think he is done, because I think he does whatever he wants. And I think like people are going to be clamoring for him to do this. They're going to want this thing to continue. And I think he just wants to do whatever he wants to do. I don't know no one knows what he's going to do, but I think he'll hang it up. If that guy comes out and says he's going to do something, he usually does. So
Draymond Barkley. Draymond Green's on my side, by the way. He says that he's Chuck is in his feelings.
And
not
Draymond
actually
Green
going there.
is never wrong.
He's never been wrong one time. He's the rightest man on the planet. Okay, a couple quick topics before we get out of here and do the home run game. So Trevor Lawrence got a huge extension. All I want to say about that is every single extension that gets signed makes me reevaluate the Geno Smith contract in a way that makes Geno Smith's contract look like such a bargain. And it makes me really admire, and this goes against what I've said, by the way, because I want the Seahawks to make reasonable investments over and over and over again in the quarterback position. I've wanted that since I was happy. I wasn't happy they drafted Russell Wilson, but I was happy that they were making that kind of an investment even after signing Matt Flynn. I was happy when they traded for Charlie Whitehurst. I was happy when they signed Tavares Jackson. I like that kind of thing, especially if you're building up to something on the rest of your roster, which I think they have been. Geno Smith is a starting caliber quarterback, and he's being paid half the money of a star quarterback. And he's also being paid half the money of guys who are like, are they stars or are they in the Geno Smith tier? Trevor Lawrence was obviously an amazing prospect. He's the only guy left from his draft at least the early picks to still be on his original team. He signed, I think it was a 5-year, $275 million contract. If I'm the Jaguars, I'm fucking terrified by that contract. Like, that is the same way, I think Dak is a good quarterback. I posted a thing on Twitter many years ago where I was like, if you could take the contracts out of it, take the dead money out of it, if you could trade Russell Wilson for Dak Prescott straight up, and I think Dak's like 4 years younger than Russ, would you do it? This is, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. Overwhelmingly, Seahawks fans are like, no way, I would never do that. That's so stupid. In my mind, it was like, yeah, the guy's younger and is like arguably accomplished as much except for a Super Bowl. But do I think Dak is in the category of like the most valuable quarterbacks in the NFL? I do not. And so it's just made me really appreciate what the Seahawks have done with the quarterback position in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that quarterback contracts work now, where you see guys who have really accomplished nothing, like Trevor Lawrence, for example, getting huge paydays and getting paid like the best quarterbacks in the league, that's terrifying, especially for a league that is so money driven, where you have to abide by a salary cap and play by these financial rules. And it's like, in every other way, you're trying to cut costs, and yet you're doing this excessive spending on the figurehead of your team, basically the guy who is the face of your franchise, which is important. Obviously, we all agree that person is critically important to your team's success. However, if they haven't done anything to make your team successful, it's interesting that you're willing to make that kind of investment. So that's, I've always kind of liked this Geno thing. I mean, I don't think he's like a terrible quarterback by any means, but really it's like when you look at the data-driven approach to baseball, like we were just talking about, and all the ways that you can just take a look mathematically at different paths to success, the one the Seahawks have seems to most closely replicate what teams try to do when they're capturing the magic of a rookie quarterback on that contract, right? On that first contract where they're not paying that guy a whole lot and they can really invest in other areas of the team. Well, the Seahawks are like, look, we're not always going to be able to find that rookie, and there is a lot of risk in those rookies. That's a reality. You go draft even a first-round quarterback, the success rate of those guys is not super high still. I mean, there's a lot of room for error there. So, unless you're absolutely convinced that there's a guy out there who is going to be the face of your franchise and he's just a can't miss, then, certainly go get a guy like that. But otherwise, you have to find ways to save money and at least try and help your team get to a championship, right? And probably one of the easiest ways to do that is to save money at a position where everyone's paying a very, very high premium to get a guy. And it's like, unless you're Patrick Mahomes or, Joe Burrow or somebody like that, it's probably not worth the money, unless you really think that they're that much of a difference maker. So getting by, and this, we've talked about this already, but this year will be very interesting for the Seahawks because new coordinator, new coaching staff. It's like, if they can get something out of Geno this year, the way that he's performed the last couple, then maybe they really have something there and they can kind of keep this train rolling.
One thing I want to talk about is Mike. I want to talk about this in a moment. Mike Hansen brought up an idea to me. Nick Lindsay said, "Are you starting the show at a random time of day again?" hey, we're two guys with kids. We're going to do the show when we can do the show. I understand not everyone's going to be able to catch it live. I try to get it scheduled early enough that if you're really planning your day around our show, you can, fucking move
If
some
you're really
stuff
planning
around.
your day around our show,
But
I'm sorry.
what I will say is it's always available after. We don't take it down after the stream, so you can watch it as a stream. We release it as a podcast, so that's good for people to know. I don't know that we do a good job of promoting the podcast portion anymore because the live stream is so much more fun than caring about a podcast. And then so Nick says 3 p.m. on Thursdays. Hey, today we started at 2:30 because we could start at 2:30. Sometimes it might start at 1, sometimes it might be a different day. Just, subscribe, keep an eye out, alerts, all that bullshit. And yeah, sometimes sorry, it's going to come out at a different time, and that's, if we were making money off this thing, maybe we'd be a little more devout. But listen, I'll be honest with you. It's all fucking Alex's fault. I could do it at 3 o'clock every Thursday. It's
That's
always
true.
Alex's fault. So
I will agree with you there. Look, let's defend Casey for a minute. He would do this show every day of the week if he could.
literally would do it every day. That's not
he loves
that's
spending
something-
time with me, and I understand that, but my time is limited.
Alex doesn't love spending time with me as much as I do with him, apparently. So Mike brought up a good point, or an interesting point. I wouldn't say good. I would not give him good. There's apparently the Rich Eisen show brought this up, and then one of those football meme accounts brought it up as though the fact that Rich Eisen had talked about it meant it was like breaking news. The idea of having a separate salary cap for quarterbacks and the rest of the team. And I know that sounds really stupid, but one thing that I think would be interesting for the NFL to do is if they wanted quarterbacks, because we're reaching a point where you either have a quarterback who's weighing down your roster, and that's the story, is as that quarterback goes, the rest of your team goes. So that guy, he has to be elite or you flounder. Or you are doing, you're the one team that's not doing that, which is the Seahawks. Arguably, I think the Steelers are kind of headed that direction also, by the way. But most teams are trying to get the ground running so that they can have a young quarterback hit and have a good quarterback in place on a low contract for a year or two where they can try to take a shot at winning a Super Bowl, and that's not what the Seahawks are doing. And I would say an example of this, or an example of this type of thing in other sports, having kind of special salary allocation, is the mid-level exception in basketball. Larry Bird writes in basketball where teams can retain their own players and go above the salary cap. That's a thing. And then in soccer, they have a thing. I can't think of what it's called, but it's basically this is a really special guy, so we're going to give him this. It's some type of player. I can't remember what it's called, but in a Major League Soccer. And I do think you could see at some point in football there being one position. We're going to reduce the overall salary cap, but we're going to have one position. You pick the guy who he doesn't count against the salary cap. No matter what you pay him, you could pay him $90 million a year. He doesn't count against the salary cap because these quarterbacks are going to keep costing more. And I think I think we're reaching peak quarterback. We're getting close to reaching peak quarterback where the quarterback's salary actually outpaces even the best quarterback's value to their team. And even a Patrick Mahomes, who I believe to be essentially the best quarterback of this generation, arguably, I don't think it's that arguable yet, but could be one of the best, or could be the best quarterback ever by the time his career is over. Even Patrick Mahomes is probably not worth half of his team's salary.
Yeah, I get the argument, but I like the idea of having one salary cap that everyone has to abide by because it does create, I guess, this hurdle to jump through for everybody, in some ways. And I think if you start going out of this 2 separate salary cap method, then ultimately you get no salary cap, and then you just have baseball, right? And then it's the teams with the most engaged owners are the ones who are going to win because they'll spend the most money. So yeah, I kind of like it the way it is. I understand it is exorbitant how much quarterbacks make in a salary cap driven sport, because every other sport that has a salary cap, players are generally getting paid in a more equitable fashion. You don't have certainly don't have one position that dominates it the way quarterbacks do. So it's unique, but I don't necessarily see it as a problem that has to be solved. I think they're going to keep every year they raise the salary cap. That'll continue to happen, and guys will get paid accordingly.
We also, I mean, a version of this that we've seen, kind of like the other side of this, the downside of this, is we saw it in Seattle a lot with like the Sonics kept Jerome James kept Jerome James, I think, one contract longer than they probably needed to, and they eventually lose him to the Knicks. They signed Calvin Booth because he's a guy that you could, like, these salary cap rules, the more you regulate, the more you create these kind of untenable situations. And another guy who just was on my mind because he just signed or he just opted into a big deal, or a big salary anyway, Gary Payton II. This is a basketball example, but Gary Payton II, Gary Payton Jr., opted into a $9.1 million salary for next year. Yeah. He signed a 3-year, $28 million deal with Portland, I believe, going into the 2022 season. This man has never averaged 10 points a game in his life. He's never averaged 20 minutes a game in his life.
Yeah. Basketball is so different than football, because with football, it's like if you have extra money to spend, you usually just reward your good players and give them a raise. Sure. But in basketball, it's like rather than doing that, they spend up to the cap by like paying guys who have never done anything a ton of money.
Right? Well, they spend over the cap, because the thing about this is a guy like Gary Payton Jr. is going to potentially benefit from a situation where, I guess the Portland situation maybe is different, because I don't think he was on. I don't think maybe he signed a mid-level exception deal. I don't know. But by the way, great nicknames for Gary Payton Jr. Young Glove, that's fine. The best nickname possible for a guy who's the son of Gary Payton, the Mitten. What a great nickname for Gary Payton Jr.
I'm sure he loves that one. Probably tells all the ladies at the club. That's me, the Mitten.
Are you smitten for the Mitten? Anyway, it becomes easier to retain your own players, and it also becomes kind of like the only way you can fill that spot, because it's not like if you don't spend $9 million on Gary Payton Jr., you can go spend $9 million on someone else. If you don't sign Gary Payton Jr. potentially, or if he doesn't take that deal or opt into whatever salary for 24-25, you might not fill that with anyone except for like a minimum salary guy. And so the system is all fucked up. And I like this, by the way. This is a great indicator of our audience. Who is the guy that just signed a 4-year, $189 million deal? Or $189 million deal? Isn't he a basketball player? We're not even sure on the sport. This is actually just a contract-based podcast. I think it was Pascal Siakam, right?
Siakam's a good player. Yeah,
he's a good player. But he's a guy that, like, should he be signing a max deal? I don't know. But again, it's like basketball players. Every basketball player that is going into free agency has the same leverage as a quarterback in the NFL, where it's like, it's either
someone's got to get those max deals.
But it's also like, it's either me or it's, again, the team's probably already over the salary cap or is close enough to the salary cap that it's like retaining your own players is so much more valuable and cost effective than trying to go acquire, like, get yourself far enough under the cap to sign a max player means gutting your roster and basically subordinating your whole roster to the rest of the league and hoping someone comes around the year that you have cap space. Okay. We'll move on to our last topic before the home run game.
Oh, we have another topic. I
my
guy ready. Go.
So it was a good sports weekend. I spent a little bit of time. By the way, I want to say this. I want to talk about Caitlin Clark more. I recognize this is like the topic du jour every week. We have plenty of opportunities. She's the Colin Kaepernick of her time, and I don't mean that from a racial activism perspective. I just mean Colin Kaepernick, that topic completely exhausted people's willingness to continue. I think that's like, I'm fully on Colin Kaepernick's side as far as his right to protest, all that stuff. But that like, I think put a huge dent into sports media, because it was like a constant topic, and like viewers got exhausted by it. And I think Caitlin Clark is going to become the same thing. And we're not talking about her. That's my point. There is something to talk about there. I'm just letting everyone know we're making the choice to not talk about Angel Reese clubbing Caitlin Clark in the head during a game that I was watching, which, by the way, I do think like it was a flagrant foul. We can move on from that. That's it. This is basketball. She got called for a flagrant foul. The team got penalized. Bryson DeChambeau, my favorite golfer. We've talked about him a little bit. He's, I would say he is the Trevor Bauer of golf without the sexual assault allegations, but with the same kind of reputation as a little bit of an asshole, a guy who tinkers, a guy who's always on, like, trying to be on the leading edge of the science, the kinetic science of golf, and really try to press the boundaries of what is like a legal golf club even. And he comes into did you watch any of this, by the way? Do you ever consume golf on TV?
I did watch a little bit of the U.S. Open. I will watch a little bit of golf here and there. For somebody who golfs as much as I do, I barely watch any golf because in general, I find it boring. Here's the thing about watching golf, man. The people that really, really, really love to watch golf make me not want to watch golf.
Sure.
That's generally how it goes.
That's kind of true of every sport, to be honest with you. Like,
did you see that shot on 8? Oh my God, it was sick. Did you see that shot out of the bunker? It's like, yeah, I've been in plenty of bunkers. I know exactly what the shots are like.
Sure. So he comes into the day leading by, I think it was 3 strokes to start the day. Ends up giving up his lead to Rory McIlroy, who's like, Rory McIlroy, I think, has become like the Phil Mickelson of our generation, where it's like, he's got a reputation as a guy that just can't put away a major, right? Like, that's I know he has won majors, but like he's like, people view him as a choker. And that's,
yeah, he's the Buffalo Bills. I mean, he's just like, he can't finish.
Yeah. And I think he missed 2 short putts in the last 3 holes, or maybe it was 4 holes. Bryson DeChambeau makes this huge putt, or a huge 50-yard bunker shot on 18 that was like crazy shot. If you and I play on courses that are like soft greens and relatively flat greens, that would be incredibly difficult for us. For him to do that where he did it from was like amazing. And then, yeah, I guess like I feel like the world's coming around on Bryson DeChambeau. They're seeing what I see, and it's kind of the same thing I see now in Charles Barkley. I credit, you know who I credit for this? Who I credit for the villain becoming kind of an anti-hero that people really enjoy is The Rock. The Rock was, and this isn't just because my pal Nick Lindsay is a wrestling fan, and he's one of the few active commenters on this episode. The Rock made villains cool. Pro wrestling made villains cool in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
And now I think you can be a guy that is Bryson DeChambeau, who goes against the grain, who bucks convention, who challenges the norms of golf, the rules and the norms, and eventually come around on the other side as a guy that people really like because they've seen you get shit on your whole career.
Yeah, I don't think, it's really interesting how golf has opened up. I think a couple of things have worked in their favor. One, the Full Swing show on Netflix. Anything that's on Netflix, like the F1 show on Netflix. 5 years ago, no one gave a shit about F1. Now, men, women, everybody loves
Sure.
F1. And it's like, yeah, you love it because it became a humanizing show on Netflix that you could get into that ultimately led you to the sport. It's the same thing with golf. I mean, they've basically done that with golf and made it interesting for people. And the one thing I find really funny is that Bryson's a Live Tour guy. A year ago, what were we hearing from like the hardcore golf fans? They were so besides themselves about the Live Tour, about all these golfers taking the Saudi blood money and becoming, basically defecting from the PGA Tour. I don't think that they were so upset. I truly believe that the hardcore golf fans were not upset about the Saudi blood money thing. I don't think they really cared about that. I think they cared that their favorite sports league was taking a hit.
Sure.
The PGA Tour was taking a hit because these guys were leaving. It was more about how does this affect me, not how does this affect society and where this money is coming from and all that it stands for.
I think another thing that made it harder to hate Live, by the way, was the proposed PGA Live merger, which we talked about briefly at the time. I don't even know where it stands right now because it hasn't happened yet, but I think what that revealed was that everybody inside the sport that was crowing most vocally about the ethical concerns about Live and that had the most hand in it were complete fucking opportunistic hypocrites.
Oh, it was just, I mean, everybody was taking advantage of that situation to pretend that they were a social activist for a day.
Sure.
It's like, you're not a social activist. You just don't want to turn on your TV on a Sunday afternoon and not see the best golfers in the world. So as soon as those guys were allowed to play in the majors, I think everything calmed down. And now it's like guys like Bryson and other guys who defected to live, no one even cares anymore, because even
Sure.
the most ardent golf fans pretty much just watch the majors. So if those guys are still present for the majors, it's like, then who cares? Like, you're not missing much. You're not staying home on Saturdays and Sundays in other weeks when it's not a major just to watch golf. I mean, some people are, sure, but not.
That's a pretty good point.
Most of the people. So it's like, as long as you can see these guys in the majors, that's all these people cared about. And now it's like all that energy you had for hating these guys a year ago has now been just turned right around, and now you're liking guys like Bryson again. It's just fun. It's just funny to me because it's like, I've never seen myself as a golf fan, even though I golf all the time, but I do find golf fans annoying, just like I find all fans annoying.
Yeah, I basically agree with you there. I think that I think it's funny. I think that Bryson has, like, because he's so outspoken, anytime he airs, it's going to be like hyper scrutinized in the same way that, like, I thought Colin Kaepernick's, by the way, his, like, smartest thing was just shutting the fuck up for the most part. Is like, I made my point, and now you guys can argue about it, but I made my point. I'm not going to keep talking until I say something wrong, and then everyone jumps on it, and it delegitimizes the point that I was making to begin with.
I think you should clip that part about where you said you just shut in the fuck up and just see about Colin Kaepernick and see how that does for you online. Let's just see. I mean, it'll definitely bring a lot of people, a lot of traffic for sure.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. I think people will definitely listen to the nuance and the full clip and certainly hear what I'm saying. I don't think people will jump on one small portion of it and misrepresent that I actually support.
Shut up and dribble.
Yeah. Okay, let's play the home run game. Which, by the way, if we have any musicians in the audience or video editors, here's what I want. I want an intro song, a home run game song, and an outro song. If you and a video, by the way. I want to be able to play the video and have everybody know the show is about to start. This is great, by the way. Did we get any UFC MMA talk this episode, or did I miss that already?
Missed it. That's actually what we led with.
Yeah, we spent 48 minutes at the beginning talking about whatever's going on in MMA, and we
missed opportunity.
Sorry, and actually, it's not going to be on the podcast version. I'm sorry to tell you, it's a secret Patreon that we don't.
That's the higher tier. You have to subscribe for that one. All right, can I go first today? I got a good guy for you.
By the way, with scores as of right now, I've missed by 424 home runs. Alex has missed by 345 home runs.
I think I can get you back in the game a little bit today. I'm giving you as close to a softball as I can give you, but it's a fun one. I like this one. That's why I picked it. It's another recent retiree. I'm really on the recent retiree train right now. I don't need to say anything about this person. He needs no introduction. It's Kyle Seager.
Ooh, that's a great one. Because mine is actually, I believe, a recent retiree also, although he's a guy that feels ageless and timeless. But, man, Kyle Seager was a guy that, by the way, when the Mariners drafted Dustin Ackley, I was, like, very excited to see Kyle Seager also, because that North Carolina team was just so stacked. Kyle Seager was, like, nominally a second baseman at the time, or thought might move to third base, played a little bit of shortstop even. Was very excited about, but he was kind of the guy that was blocking. You remember Dustin Ackley was an outfielder. He played second base with the Mariners, but he was a center fielder, and they were like, we think he could play second base, which is like the weirdest.
They played him in college. They actually moved him to first base because he had an arm injury.
Right.
He had a throwing injury, so that's why the Mariners ultimately shifted him to second. Which none of it worked out.
Well, yeah, it was weird though. It wasn't the second base part that failed, by the way. In fact, the second base thing is probably what allowed his mediocre bat to last as long as it did. But seeing a guy that's like, oh, this guy's a center fielder or a first baseman, and going like, we think we could play second, is the same risk-reward potential of the guy who sees rotting milk and goes, that could be cheese, though. That could become cheese at some point, and we might like it.
I always thought about this as like this always was very funny to me, but like the comp that they always gave for Dustin Ackley was Darren Erstad, and is there a less sexy comp in the history of the world? Like Darren Erstad's a very good Major League Baseball player. If Darren Erstad had been on your baseball team, you would have been fine with it. But it's just such an uninspiring comp that you're like, God, no one's gonna run out into the streets and be shouting that we just drafted the next Darren Erstad.
Yeah, Darren Erstad is the kind of guy that if he plays for your team, it's hard to tell. It's hard to remember if it was 3 years or 27 years because he's just so unmemorable. You're like, I know he was there, but like, wow, for that long, huh?
Even when you think about the Angels World Series teams, he's probably like the 5th or 6th person you might think of on that team.
Yeah. Okay, so Kyle Seager's got a couple things. One, had like, I would say not mediocre power, but was never like a 40 home run a year guy. Was never like a elite power hitter, and also has a career that was cut relatively short. I would guess that he probably ended his career at like 33 years old. Plays in college, came up pretty quick if I remember right, even though he's like a third-ish round pick. I'm gonna guess he played 10 years. And I'd guess there's a couple of years where he's around 30 home runs, and then there's probably some years where he's in the like low 20s or high teens, this has gotten me in trouble in the past. And so now I'm just trying to read body language, count a couple cards, see what the dealer has to offer. Nothing. Man, so 10 years. Also, like, I think pretty healthy throughout his career. Probably, I bet he played 130 plus games, like 9 or 10 of those 10 seasons, with maybe the first year being the exception. Man, this is a good one, Alex.
I know.
I'm going to say, man, I'm like really regretting it already. I'm going to say 230 home runs.
Wow, this might be your best one this year.
Wow.
That's how good this was. I told you I was giving you a softball.
That's not bad. Well, I was moments away from saying 180 home runs, so I could have really.
Good thing you didn't do that.
Could have really botched it.
You took that softball and you hit it. I don't know if you hit it out of the yard, but you definitely hit it off the top of the wall. So good job.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Here's the weirdest thing about Kyle Seager as I was looking at his stats. So he came up in 2011 when he was 23 years old. He plays 53 games, which is a lot. I mean, I remember the year that he came up. It seemed like he became kind of entrenched as the third baseman at the end of the year. But he only hit 3 home runs that first year in 53 games. That's not very many. Like over a full season, that'd be like 9 or 10 home runs, which would have been very low for him.
Well, it's not bad for a guy that you thought was like a fringe second base, third base prospect, but a guy who has the profile that Kyle Seager ended up with.
Yeah, looking back on the rest of every other season he had, you're like, man, that's not very many home runs for the number of games he played. His 162 game average for home runs was 26. He did play technically 11 years, but that first season was only 53 games. There's also the COVID shortened year in there, so that's only 60
we gotta
games.
Factor it in.
Yeah.
Was that his last season?
No, his last season was 2021, just a couple years ago. His last season was the most home runs he ever hit in a season. He hit 35 home runs that year. That guy truly went out on top. I mean, man,
he went out on top having never played in a playoff game.
It's only been 3 years, and it felt like he retired too early, that he should still be playing, and that like he was pretty good that year, and the thing that, I mean, this will get lost in time basically, but Kyle Seager will be remembered as a very dependable Mariner. He kind of reminds me of Alvin Davis, plays for the team for about a decade. Alvin Davis was even less than that, and he's so beloved for only playing here for like 7 or 8 years or whatever it was. But Seager plays here, for a decade and is like the most dependable Mariner during that time. Kind of bridges a couple different eras, right? And the thing that'll always get lost is that for like the last 3 or 4 years of that contract or his time with the Mariners, it seemed like the fans were trying to run his ass out of town. Remember that? And that all came down from Dipoto. All the Dipoto stands were trying to run Kyle Seager out of town. And I know why. I mean, Dipoto was mad when he inherited this job from Jag Zaremczyk and realized that they'd snuck a poison pill into Kyle Seager's contract that basically made him untradeable. He was upset about that. And so for the next, from then until the end of Kyle Seager's career, they basically spewed propaganda about this guy to get the fans to turn on him, which is kind of fucked up. And I know that that's, one of those things that people might not even realize they were doing that on behalf of the organization, but it's like, that is something that we did to Kyle Seager, which is unfortunate. So anyway,
my memory is that the relationship ends like extremely acrimoniously. Like they
didn't even like notify him that they weren't re-signing him, basically, or didn't want to bring him back. So like they never even gave this guy a chance. That regime hated him, and for me, that was one of those things that like outside of the lack of success or anything else, that really turned me off to the Dipoto regime, because it was like, you guys inherited this player who was probably one of your best players, and you were upset about something as stupid as a contract that you inherited, and you let that dictate how you treated this guy, right? Like, that is not how you should run an organization. So anyway, that's one of those things that's probably going to get buried and lost in history, but it is what it is. So you said 230 home runs, correct?
Yep.
The number of home runs he hit in his career, 242.
That's pretty fucking good for me.
That might be one of your best. That's definitely one of your best ever. It might be your best ever.
It might be my best ever.
Yeah, pretty good. You might be right back in this thing.
Yeah, it could be. So I will say I had a different guy in mind, but now that we're going recently retired former Mariners as a quasi theme, I think that, and this guy, I will say, I don't know that he's officially retired, but he has not played in 2024. He's a guy who he did play for the Mariners. His acquisition by the Mariners, I was very unhappy about at the time. I will say that, and that might give it away for a lot of people. The guy's Nelson Cruz.
Oh gosh, Nelly. God, how many home runs did he hit? I mean, he played a long career. Somewhere in among my baseball cards, I have a Nelson Cruz rookie card. This is generally how I know when guys came up or thereabouts, because I have their rookie card somewhere. And Nelson Cruz's rookie card is, I believe it's from 2005. It's the 2005 Topps update set. So he probably came up in about 05. So he ends up having, what is that, an 18-year career or so, 17, 18 years. Long career. He obviously didn't play full seasons every year. He got busted for PEDs once. He spent some time on the IL, but he took pretty good care of his body. Have you ever seen like the videos or like the articles on his weightlifting regimen? It's insane. His weightlifting regimen is not like, it's like more intense than like a weightlifting bro's weightlifting regimen.
Oh.
And he was doing it before games. Like, so not only was he doing this thing, but then a couple hours later, he's going out there and playing a full baseball game. So
it's crazy what steroids will do for you.
Yeah. Well, I remember once, like, there was a segment on Root Sports where they were like just watching him work out. And he's like, he's got 2 dumbbells and he's just doing like shoulder presses. And he's doing shoulder presses with 100-pound dumbbells in each hand. Like, that's insane. I've never even seen people do that in the gym, really. Like, what he was doing was
that's
crazy.
pretty crazy. I mean, especially to go out and play a baseball game after that. I mean, I'm podcasting moments after doing that, but that's a different activity. So
it's just nuts. Okay, so I know he has a long career, and I know he hits a lot of home runs throughout his career. He's got to be in the 400s, I would think. He's kind of a late bloomer, though, too. His first couple of years, he wasn't like the greatest player in the world. But by the time he gets here, he's pretty well established. This is a tough one. I think he probably averages like 30 to 35 home runs a year, or that's his. That would be about his average. And if he has as long a career as I think, so like let's say like 16 full seasons, just to err, maybe more like 15 with all the suspension and injury stuff. So maybe like the equivalent of 15 to 16 full seasons times, let's say 30 a year. So that would be, I mean, that right there is 450. So I'm going to say he has 444 home runs.
pretty damn good. I will say that. I'm going to start with that, and then I'll give you the rundown. So he comes up in 2005. You were right about that. Plays 8 games. Can you tell me which team he played for in those 8 games?
The Milwaukee Brewers.
So he never plays another game for Milwaukee again. He gets traded in the offseason as part of, I believe it is, I'm trying to get it's as part of the Carlos Lee trade. So gets traded by the Milwaukee Brewers with Carlos Lee. Actually, this might be not the Carlos Lee trade. This Carlos Lee and him might be prospects in this same trade. For the Rangers,
Lee was established by then. Yeah, he'd been playing for a few years.
But
so
Kevin Mench is in Francisco. This is... Yeah,
so they probably traded, was Lee coming from Texas to Milwaukee?
No, he was going from Milwaukee to Texas.
Oh, so he gets traded with Carlos Lee. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So you're right though. He came up in 99, so he is old enough that he's probably the centerpiece of that deal. So he becomes part of the deal that sends Carlos Lee there. Kevin Mensch, who's by the way, Kevin Mensch is a great name for this game. Like a great guy, right? I think we've discovered a thing about this game, which is that it's easier to get big misses from the other person on a higher home run guy.
I would say, look up Kevin Mensch really quick. I'm going to give a guess. I'm going to say 93 home runs.
I mean, 89 home runs. You were pretty fucking close.
Nice.
Now tell me this. What do you think his highest home run total in a season was?
He probably had like one big year. So I'm going to say 22.
He had 2 consecutive seasons, one with 25, or one with 26, one with 25. Pretty interesting career for Kevin Mensch. Interesting to only you and me, potentially, and nobody else in the entire world.
He also had the biggest head in baseball. He had the size 8.25 head. I remember that. Yeah.
Anyway.
Can't even buy those hats in stores. They had to like special make them for him.
They got to sew 2 hats together to fit Kevin Mensch's head. Until Barry Bonds came around, and then that's when they made those giant hats that you see rappers wearing now. Okay, so he plays Nelson Cruz plays a couple years in Texas, just like partial seasons, from 2006 to 2008. And this is a guy who like comes up late, spends 3 years. This is a very Edgar Martinez-esque career that he had, because he then spends 3 years as like part-time player / injured or whatever. Doesn't really, only the next 3 years combines for 1 full season of plate appearances, and then turns it on. By the way, so he's 28 years old, going into his age 28 season. Take a guess at how many home runs Nelson Cruz had in his career.
How many home runs he had in his career?
Yeah, going into his age 28.
Oh, going into this, I was like, I just gave you the number. Yeah. 444 was the number. Going into his age 28 season, he probably had like, I don't know, 30 home runs.
He had 22 home runs going into his 8. Yeah. And then just goes off. I mean, has several 40 home run seasons, leads the league in home runs with Baltimore in 2014, and then becomes a Mariner. I was angry that he became a Mariner, hated the idea of him becoming a Mariner, hits 44, 43, 39, 37 home runs as a Mariner, leads Major League Baseball in RBIs, by the way, as a Mariner in 2017 as a 36-year-old player. This is the real Edgar career.
It's crazy, I know you haven't given the number yet, but it's crazy how like the beginning of the steroid era and the end of the steroid, not the end, but later on in the steroid era, like how differently we viewed players. The beginning of the steroid era, you were a pariah if you were caught.
Yeah.
Then at the end, not only is Nelson Cruz still beloved, but he's like still working in base. He works for MLB now. Sure. Like the fans still love this guy, and I guess to his credit, he handled the suspension the way you would want. Like you want people to just kind of be like contrite, shut up, and like take your medicine, right? Like you took your medicine before, now you will take this medicine, and just shut up and deal with it, right? And that's kind of what he did. And he came back and was more or less the same guy, and that's all you hope for, right? Yeah,
he's also one of those guys where you're like, well, would he have been the same guy without the steroids? And then, wow, they really stick around after, it's not like you have to keep doing them necessarily.
And that guy worked out so hard like pre and post. It's like, yeah, maybe the steroids helped him get on that workout regimen, but his credit, he stayed on it. So
yeah. Well, they always say, I've always heard people say, like, you do get to keep those muscles even after this, like the suspension, you still get to keep those muscles. So anyways, he makes a bunch of all-star games, was finished, with MVP votes in 6 seasons. Yeah, what did he make? And then won some, 4 Silver Sluggers. Like, by every metric, were it not for his steroid suspension, Nelson Cruz is like a first ballot Hall of Famer, basically. Especially a guy who shoved all that into a really short amount of time, into like the last 14 or 15 years of a 19-year career, by the way, where he hits 464 home runs. So I made up a little bit of ground, but not very much today. Both pretty good guesses. I think I had a tougher one for you, but once we did I had him on the top of my list of guys. And once we did former Mariners, it felt right.
It was good. It was a good pairing. Those two were such good friends that, it was good.
All right. Well, thank you. By the way, I got to start getting better at promoting this at the beginning of the show, so don't penalize me and not come to my shows. Tomorrow I'll be in Chehalis opening for Catherine Blanford. On Thursday. Jesus Christ. I'm very tired, Alex. I'm always tired when we do this. By the time we do this podcast, I'm very tired. So Friday, Chehalis with opening for Catherine Blanford. Saturday, 4 o'clock, I'm at Tacoma Comedy Club opening for a guy named Jeff Allen. Later in the night, Everett, Washington. I'm the whole I-5 corridor today, baby. Give me up to Bellingham somehow at midnight. No, at 8 o'clock, I'm opening for Catherine Blanford at the Everett Historic Theater. And then on Sunday, I'm hosting the Make Me Famous show at the small Tacoma Comedy Club location. All over the place this weekend. And even more importantly, my show at Bickerson's Brewhouse that I will not be participating in is this weekend. Go check that out. My buddy Greg Beechler, who we have absolutely crushed on this podcast in the past, will be headlining. You saw him feature last time when I headlined, and he's headlining this time, and a couple other great comics, including the frequent commenter Mike Hansen is hosting a show that he is doing me a big favor to host. He's certainly somebody that should be featuring on that show. Casey McLean. Also, by the way, it looks like next week will be when my special comes out. That's the plan at this point, is the 27th. I haven't started putting. We're literally still editing, so it's not like this is how close to the wire it's coming.
All right, sounds good. I'm Alex SSN, and I don't have anything to promote.
All right, bye.